Hi, in this video I'll talk about ways to make language learning more fun. Now, obviously everyone is different and we all have different ideas on what is fun and what is not. But I'm pretty sure almost everyone will find ways to spice up their language learning from this video. Before I get into the techniques and tricks and resources, first I want to say that fast progress is fun. Like maybe you have this experience in other areas. When you get more experience in doing stuff, when you find out ways to make something more efficient, it gradually becomes more enjoyable. And on the other hand, if the progress is slow, part of us will probably be thinking like, maybe I'm wasting my time here. I believe we can all learn faster than most people think. And when I talk about fast progress, many of you will probably think, well, it's easy for some people. They have talent. But more important than talent is really having these daily habits that kind of make language learning pretty much automatic, and habits that kind of respect the way our memory works. Like I said, we need daily habits. I know it can sound tough. Most of us are probably quite busy, and in my other videos I will talk more about creating daily habits and how you really start those. But I can say already that you can start with small. You can start with 10-minute study sessions, and once you get used to using these different learning tools and habits, it will be easier to start extending the time. And often what happens is that if you tell yourself that studying 10 minutes is enough, then you will end up studying a bit more. And even if you study only 10 minutes, like over time, that can add up to quite a lot of practice. Also, after you have the basics of the language down, after you've studied with maybe less interesting learning content, because I guess most people will not find the language learning textbooks very enjoyable. But as soon as you have gone through them, you can move into more enjoyable content like comics and interviews of interesting people. But yeah, once you get into those things, it will feel less like studying, and you'll be able to do it pretty much any time of the day, even if you're tired. Like I can say that it can become like a way to relax. I mentioned learning from interviews of interesting people. So you might think that interviews are fast and complicated. Like it's gonna take me a long time before I can start learning from those. But for example, the website lingq.com and their app, where you can find a lot of natural conversations with transcripts. So you can both listen to the interview and read it, which will obviously make it a lot easier to check a lot of the words. And some of the interviews are between teachers, or at least one of the people in the interviews will be a teacher who is used to speaking quite slowly and clearly. So yeah, in Link you can find really valuable interviews and texts. Also, if you know a similar language already to the target language you're learning now, even these kind of interviews may be like pretty realistic and even enjoyable to read and listen to. So, for example, when I started learning Italian, I knew Spanish already. Italian and Spanish are quite similar, so I could very early on, maybe even in the first week of my Italian studies, I started reading and listening to interviews on Link. Then let's look at comics, studying languages with comics or graphic novels. Why are they so useful in language learning? Well, one of the reasons is that they have a lot of dialogue and it's usually pretty natural. So there's not so much like descriptions of nature or the scenery or some internal struggles of someone. And images give context to the dialogue. So you don't have to use the dictionary so much when you can just guess the meaning from the facial expressions of the characters in the comics or other clues. And they will just become more memorable when there's this beautiful image, or I mean some are more beautiful, some less, like some are really high quality art. One nice thing about comics is that there's also a lot of genres. So some people would think that, well, comics are only for teenagers or children. But yeah, there are comic versions of classic novels. There are comics about pretty serious or otherwise interesting historical events, romantic stories, war stories. So I think pretty much anyone will find some comics that will be interesting to them. So yeah, when I'm reading those graphic novels and these kind of things, it doesn't feel so much like studying. Like I want to know what happens next. I mean, usually I'm making notes when I read those comics. But yeah, it doesn't it's not boring usually. Like maybe the first comics you read, they can be a bit of a struggle if you don't have such a strong foundation in the grammar and the vocabulary yet. But yeah, you will learn quickly. You will learn a lot from comics. Obviously, you can read traditional books. So many language learners will use a translation of their favorite novel if it's translated into the target language. But usually, I wouldn't recommend using novels for language learning if you are in the early stages of acquiring a language, because novels have usually pretty challenging language. So if you study from novels, there's a high chance that you might become frustrated. But then there are also graded readers. So these are simplified versions of books. So they can be interesting books like crime stories or simplified versions of classic novels. Often they also have the audio, which is really useful, so you get used to the sounds of the language also. So yeah, whatever you use for your studies, comics or your textbook, interviews, I highly recommend taking notes, at least sometimes. Like when you take notes, it kind of forces you to concentrate a bit more, and often this way you'll just naturally learn a lot of the grammar when you write down a lot of example sentences, phrases from the stuff you read. You pick up the structure of the language naturally also. So yeah, any kinds of notes are useful, but it's especially important to collect these sentence starters or conversational connectors. Let me give you a few examples. On the other hand, I would say that, if I'm not mistaken, I've heard that. So these are sentence starters that make your phrases longer and more fluent. Like imagine speaking in your native language without using or without knowing these kind of expressions. It would be quite difficult, or you would sound like you're mansplaining, because you don't have these kind of ways to make the statements more soft, like, yeah, I've heard that, or if I'm not mistaken. So when I see these kind of sentence starters in a text, they often kind of feel like they start to shine, because I get kind of a little excited that I know that, oh, this will be really useful in a conversation. Also, I store them in a different place from my other notes, um, usually on the other side of the notebook. So I'm filling out the notebook from both sides. And these sentence starters I revise more often. So when I know that I'm going to have a conversation in the target language soon, in the bus or in the train on the way to meet that person, I will often go through these sentence starters, and yeah, they make my conversations at least a little easier. I mean, there are other kinds of really important core vocabulary you need, like question words, why, what, where, and expressions of time, like last week, tomorrow, in the near future. But yeah, there's another thing I wanted to mention about these sentence starters. Often they make your phrases, or sometimes they make your phrases more funny also. So if someone asks me where I'm from, I can answer, between you and me, I'm from Finland, or it's not a secret that I'm from Finland. So you'll be able to make your phrases a little less usual. And then let's talk about listening. So it's important to listen to the same stuff multiple times. I know this can sound boring, like listening to the same interview or same dialogue from a textbook, but it's a nice feeling, like being able to understand more and more of the language. Every time you notice new things, like you will notice new things about the phonetics, the sound system of the language. And this way you will absorb a lot of the vocabulary just naturally. So you don't have to necessarily do some boring exercises or other kind of explicit grammar study necessarily so much. It can become like music, like after you've heard a song a few times, it starts ringing in your head like an earworm. And I've noticed the same thing happens in language learning after you've listened to a dialogue a few times. Of course, it helps if you find content where you have someone speaking with a pleasant voice. Something I'm working on myself in my English also. So where do you find stuff to listen to in the early stages, especially? I recommend the Asimil textbooks. They are really high quality. They have a lot of dialogues. And Asimil has little comics also. You can either get the Asimil textbook in the paper form or you can get it through their app. But if you study through the smartphone app, I would recommend using the app through a tablet where you don't have like disturbing or tempting social media apps or dating apps or whatever. At least for the major languages, there are many podcasts available also. Often they will sell the transcripts. Some podcasts are pretty basic level, so you can have some interesting additional learning content from those podcasts where people talk about their daily life or travels or have slow interviews. So an important question I think most language learners should be asking is, how many minutes did I listen in the target language today? Because you can have pretty high goals in a language, which is totally fine. But if you don't have daily habits, for example, daily habits of listening, you won't reach that high goal. Someone has said that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. I hope this video was useful. In my other videos, I'll talk about, for example, building those habits and how to make speaking the language easier. And if you have any questions or comments or feedback, that would be very useful. And it's interesting to hear about your experiences and your challenges in language learning. Yeah, this is a new channel, so any feedback would be useful also. See you.